Okay, let's continue with the loop of Henle, the countercurrent multiplier. Nadhani katika topic nzima ya homeostasis and excretion, hii ndio part ambayo watu wanaionaga kuwa ni ngumu. Sasa sijajua shida yao kubwa inakuwa ni nini, lakini tuende pamoja, sababu part nyingi watu wanaonaga they are easy, but the loop of Henle, the countercurrent multiplier, ndio wanaonaga kama ni kitu cha ajabu. The loop of Henle have descending and ascending limb kama tulivyosema. A countercurrent multiplier system is the mechanism that expends energy to create concentration gradient. Countercurrent multiplier system. Countercurrent multiplier system ni system ambayo inatumia energy ili kuweza kutengeneza nini? Concentration gradient. Kwa kazi kubwa hapa ya loop of Henle ni kutengeneza concentration gradient inayoruhusu maji kuabsorbed from the loop of Henle or from the filtrate into the interstitial. So we have the additional information here. It is found widely in nature and especially in mammalian organs. Yani kwamba a countercurrent multiplier system, it is found widely in nature and especially in mammalian organs. For example, it can refer to the process that underlying the process of urine concentration, that is in the production of hyperosmotic urine by mammalian kidney. Inatumia nini? Countercurrent multiplier system from the form of function of loop of Henle, which consists of two parallel limbs of renal tubules running in opposite direction, separated by interstitial space of renal medulla. So the mechanism by which the loop of Henle generates the hypertonic interstitial gradient is known as countercurrent multiplication. So loop of Henle, it acts as the countercurrent multiplier. Mechanism ni multiplication. Loop of Henle yenyewe ni multiplier. This designation is based on the flow of fluid in the opposite direction, that is countercurrent flow. Katika loop of Henle, fluid ya upande itakuwa inaenda hivi, wakati hapa itakuwa inaenda na flow hivi. That means hii ni descending limb na hapa ni ascending limb. Unaona, the flow is opposite, that's why it is known as countercurrent. Unaona, countercurrent because flow ni kwenye opposite direction, kama pia ambavyo tulisoma countercurrent heat exchange katika homeostasis kule. So this designation au jina hili limetokana na the flow of fluid in the opposite direction, that is countercurrent, within the two parallel limbs of the loop of Henle. Note that the fluid flows into the medulla in the descending limb and out of the medulla in the ascending limb. Into the medulla in the descending limb and out of the medulla in the ascending limb. Kwa hiyo fluid inaingia ndani ya into the medulla, yani inaingia huku, kwa sababu medulla ni huku nje, unaona huku ndo medulla. So it flows into the medulla in the descending limb and out of the medulla in the ascending limb. So where the descending limb of the loop of Henle is highly permeable to water molecule and less permeable or impermeable to salt. The descending limb is highly permeable to water molecule. Water is highly permeable to water molecules. Water inakwenda move out. And less permeable or impermeable to salt ions such as sodium, chlorine, and this one. Kwa tunavyokuwa tunashuka, water inakwenda move out. Tunavyokuwa fluid inashuka, water inakwenda move out. Fluid inakwenda panda, ions inakuwa zina move out. Unaona? The countercurrent flow within the descending and ascending limb of the loop of Henle multiplies the osmotic gradient. Inakuwa inazidisha, inafanya osmotic gradient iongezeke in multiples. Multiply the osmotic gradient between the tubular fluid in the descending and ascending limb. That's why it is known as countercurrent multiplier. So countercurrent means fluid flow in opposite direction. Multiply it because it tends to multiplies the concentration of fluid. Hypertonic interstitium is generated by reabsorption of sodium in the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. Hypertonic manake yenye concentration kubwa. Hypertonic. This is an important step for a uniferous tube to excrete urine hyperosmotic with respect to plasma. Unaona, kwa hii ni stage ya muhimu sana ili kwamba tubes the kidney ziweze kuexcrete urine ambayo ni hyperosmotic, yani concentrated. Kwa nini? Kwa sababu tunavotoa hii hyperosmotic interstitium, hii ina allow water iwe reabsorbed from the descending limb of the loop of Henle. So the concentration of sodium chloride increases progressively with increasing depth into the medulla, and the highest concentration of sodium chloride is at the level of papilla. This medullary gradient results from the accumulation of sodium chloride reabsorbed by the process of countercurrent multiplication. Unaona, the vasector transport nutrients and oxygen to the uniferous tubules. They also remove excess water and solutes continuously added by the countercurrent multiplication process. An increase in blood flow through the vasector dissipates the medullary gland. Anyway, unachotakiwa kuelewa hapa ni kwamba concentration na solution huwa inaongezeka kwa kadri tunavyoshuka. Na tukifika hapa chini concentration inakuwa maximum. Tukianza kupanda hivi concentration solution inaanza kupungua. So let's say kama ilikuwa 300 inaweza kaenda 600, inaweza kaenda 900. Hapa chini labda ikawa 1200. Alafu tena ikaanza kupanda, ikaanza kuwa 800, ikaanza kuwa 600, ikaanza kuwa 400 na ikarudi tena labda 300. Unaona? Kwa hiyo concentration tunavozidi kushuka inakuwa inazidi kuongezeka, tunavopanda inakuwa inapungua. Now let's see the mechanism kwamba nini kinakuwa inatokea katika hii countercurrent multiplier kinasababisha. Kwa sababu hizi concentration kwenda hivi tunaita multiplication au multiplier. Lakini kumove in opposite direction, kushuka au kupanda, tunaita countercurrent. So how the countercurrent multiplier inakuwa inafanyika na inatokeaje mechanism inakuwaje kwaje, na je inaanzia wapi, kwenye descending au ascending? Kwanza tutaelezea kwenye descending na ascending kinatokea nini. Then baadaye tutaelezea step by step inaanzia wapi inaishia wapi. Kwa hiyo the mechanism of a loop of Henle is countercurrent multiplier. The loop of Henle as countercurrent multiplier meant that the fluid flow in opposite direction in the loop of Henle. Downside and up in downside in one side and in another side and up in another side. And the effect of pump in the absorption of sodium ions and other ions is multiplied constant removal of sodium ions and other ions, which is replaced in ascending limb by descending limb from proximal convoluted tube. Kilichopo ni kwamba tunakuwa tuna remove of the ions, sodium and chloride ions, and the effect of removal of these ions is multiplied, inakuwa inazidishwa. Ndio maana nimekwambia concentration zinaongezeka kwa kuzidishwa. So it's known as countercurrent because the glomerulofiltrate flow in opposite direction ni countercurrent, and it's known as a multiplier because absorption of sodium ions and other ions increased by multiplication of constant absorption of sodium ions and other ions. Unaona? Kwa hiyo kuna multiple increase of sodium and other ions concentration by multiple. So the loop of Henle absorb mineral salts in the ascending limb and no absorption of mineral salt in the descending limb. In absorb mineral salt in the ascending limb and no absorption of salts in the descending limb. Why does the loop of Henle act the countercurrent multiplier? Sometimes tunaweza kuziita hizi kama ni condition au kama ni adaptation. Nini kinaiwezesha loop of Henle iwe ina act kama countercurrent multiplier? Kwanza, the U-turn of the loop of Henle result to close proximity of the ascending and descending limb. Kwa ascending pamoja na descending limbs zinakuwa very close, zinakuwa zina ujirani kwa sababu ya U-turn. Second, permeability of the thin descending limb to water only to maintain the osmotic gradient of medulla. Thin descending limb inakuwa permeable to water only. Third, impermeability of the descending limb to solutes descending limb does not allow the salt to pass through it. Fourth, permeability of the ascending limb to solutes only to maintain osmotic gradient. Ascending limb will allow only salts. Fifth, the impermeability of ascending limb to water. Now number 6, presence of sodium and potassium pump which ensure active transport mechanism of thick ascending limb or the active transport of the. Kwa hiyo, the descending limb is permeable to water but impermeable to salt. The ascending limb is permeable to salts but impermeable to water. And U-turn inatupelekea tu tuna close proximity. So the precise role or function of the loop of Henle is to ensure that the solution concentration in the medulla is always high so that water moves osmotically from the renal fluid in the loop back into the bloodstream. To achieve this rule, the loop of Henle function is the countercurrent multiplier system. The countercurrent multiplier system operation of the loop of Henle means that renal fluid becomes salter as it goes down the loop. Inapokuwa inashuka inakuwa ina salt nyingi. Smallest at the apex and less salter as it goes up the loop. Here it's not smallest at the apex, it is largest. Yani inakuwa ina salt nyingi at the apex and then inapoanza kupanda salt yake inafanyaje? Inapungua, unaona. In other words, the values of osmotic concentration of the filtrate in both limbs differ at any given level between the fluid in the ascending and descending limb. The difference becomes additive so that the final concentration of filtrate at the base of the loop is much greater than at either end. The longer the loop, the greater the concentration difference. Na ndio maana wanyama wanaishi kwenye desert kama kimo wanakuwa na long loop of Henle as an adaptation kuweza kuishi kwenye mazingira kama yale pale, unaona. So the mechanism of countercurrent operation of the loop of Henle is as follows. Kwanza, renal fluid from the proximal convoluted tubule enter the first portion of the descending limb of loop of Henle. This portion is thick wide and is impermeable to water, sodium chloride and urea. It is impermeable. It is impermeable to sodium chloride and urea. Renal fluid in this portion is thus isotonic to body fluid. Okay, yeah. Proximal convoluted tubule ni impermeable to both except zile ambazo zinakuwa descending limb. Okay, from the thick descending limb, the fluid then flows into a thin descending limb. Thin descending limb, this is freely permeable to water but impermeable to sodium and chloride ions, hydrogen, sodium chloride pamoja na urea. Thin descending limb, thus a fluid flows down this region. There is an osmotic uptake of water following high concentration of solute in the interstitial region of the medulla. This water is returned into the body system by the vasarcta. At each portion of thin descending limb, the concentration increases as water moves out of it. This causes the countercurrent to be called multiplier. Unaona, as I told you, concentration anza 300 inafuata 600, 900, then hapa chini inakuwa 1200. Maana yake hiyo concentration inakuwa inaongezeka kwa kadri fluid inavyoshuka. So at the apex of the loop of Henle, the concentration is at maximum. From here, the concentration from here, the concentrated renal fluid enters the ascending limb, which is totally impermeable to water and urea and freely permeable to sodium chloride. Unaona, ascending loop of Henle is freely permeable to sodium chloride, especially the thin, ya chini thin, which thus move out of the limb into the interstitial of the medulla. Unaona? Kwa hiyo tukianza na thin ascending limb, sodium zinaanza kumove out by diffusion. This reduces the concentration of the renal fluid and increases the concentration of the interstitial region. In the thick ascending limb, the membrane is impermeable to water. Membrane inakuwa impermeable to water. Sodium chloride and urea sodium chloride and urea. However, sodium chloride actively pumped out of the limb. Kwa thick ascending limb, kuna thin na thick. Tukifika kwenye thick ascending limb inakuwa impermeable to water and impermeable to even sodium chloride and urea. However, sodium chloride, they are pumped out of the thick ascending limb. This again reduces the concentration of the renal fluid. In the distal convoluted tube and collecting duct, water is taken under the influence of the vasopressin hormone, resulting into the production of the concentrated urine. But our focus is the loop of Henle. So the renal fluid flow down the descending limb towards the apex. At the loop of the loop, it becomes more and more concentrated, and as it flows up in the ascending limb, becomes more and more dilute. Unaona? This process produces a region of particularly high salt concentration in the deep part of the medulla, where the collecting duct passes before opening of pelvis. As the renal fluid passes down the collecting duct, water is excreted from it by osmosis. This raises the concentration of renal fluid, passes down the collecting duct. So water is collected from it by osmosis. This raises the concentration of the renal fluid, therefore producing hypertonic urine. Kuna baadhi ya maelezo hapo yamerudiwa. Now you can see the diagram of the loop of Henle here, and what it happens ni kwamba increase in the osmotic concentration as the fluid flows down the loop of Henle. Unaona, here we have the thick descending limb, here the thin descending limb pushing water out of the loop of Henle by osmosis. Unaona, kwa hiyo unaona hapa ilikuwa 300 imekuja kwa 500, 800, 1000, 1200. Kwa maana yake water inatoka nje. Halafu toka hapo ikifika hapa 1200, hapa ndo maximum. Tukianza kupanda hapa, hii hapa thin inatoa nini? Sodium chloride nje. So inapanda inakuwa 900. Na hii hapa thick inatoa nini? Sodium chloride nje kwa lazima. Kwa nini? Kwa active transport. Kwa hiyo inaenda 900, 700, 400, 200. Unaona? Hii inatoa by active transport. Hasa manake hapa hii region ya katikati na hapa patajaa salt, hadi huku nje kutajaa salt. Kukishajaa salt huku kote, maji yanavyokuwa yanapita pia kwenye collecting duct yanakuwa yanatoka simply by osmosis. Maji yanakuwa yanatoka simply by the process of osmosis. Kwa hiyo ndio tunaita the countercurrent multiplier system. Now we can continue with the summary of the countercurrent multiplier system. Hiyo topic in daftari la kwanza haikuisha, so we can continue with the summary in this another exercise book. Summary of the countercurrent multiplier system in the loop of Henle. Yani kama hujanielewa wewe twende tu utanielewa, kwa sababu nikishafanya hii summary naenda kufanya maswali. Ukiulizwa swali unafanyaje? Countercurrent multiplier system in the loop of Henle. The osmotic concentration of the plasma lead to the kidney to remove more or less constant. Lead for the kidney to remain more or less constant regardless of the osmotic concentration of the blood entering it. Ascending limb of the loop of Henle actively transport sodium and chloride. Inaanzia wapi? Kwenye ascending limb. Ascending limb of the loop of Henle actively transport sodium and chloride out of the tube into the surrounding tissue fluid. Inaanzia kwenye ascending limb. The absorption of sodium and chloride by the surrounding tissue fluid will raise its concentration. The whole process in ascending limb is driven by sodium potassium and results in the sodium and chloride ions accumulating in the tissue fluid of the medulla. Hasa sodium and chloride ions zikisha accumulate kwenye tissue fluid of the medulla, nini kinatokea? The concentration of these ions in the ascending limb decreases because water cannot leave the ascending limb by osmosis due to its impermeable wall. Kwa water haiwezi ka leave the ascending limb by osmosis. Kwa nini? Kwa sababu ya wall iko impermeable. Lakini descending limb iko very close to the ascending limb. So when the concentration of sodium and chloride ions is increased in the interstitial region, then the descending limb is very close to the ascending limb. So water The descending limb is permeable to water, but not sodium, potassium, and chloride. Since the surrounding fluid has been more concentrated, water leaves the tubule by osmosis. As a result, the fluid in descending limb becomes more concentrated as it flows towards the bottom of the medulla. So the actual mechanism of countercurrent multiplier starts in the in the ascending limb. You see, we have the thick ascending limb and the thin. So tuna thin ambayo ina allow sodium to move out na thick ina allow sodium. So sodium and the chloride ions, sodium chloride zita move kwenda out. Lakini hizi sodium chloride zita accumulate hapa. Zikiaccumulate zitaongeza concentration. Zikiongeza concentration water ta move kutoka huku. Unaona? So mechanism actually inaanzia huku. Ishaanzia huku ndio inakuja kusababisha effect na upande huu. Mechanism haianzi kwenye descending. Unaona? So at the descending capillary into the medulla, encounter an increasing concentration in interstitial fluid, causing water to leave the plasma by osmosis and the sodium chloride and the urea to intake. Unaona? Kwa hiyo kilichopo tu ni kwamba hicho ndicho ambacho kinatokea. So the fact that fluid in the limbs flow in the opposite direction and the effect is cumulative gives rise to the countercurrent multiplier down one side and up another side. So you can see this. Tuna 100, 400, 400, 700, 1000, 1200, 900, ni kama hivyo. Kwa hiyo kilichopo ni kwamba actually without active transport, unaona, kama tungekuwa hatuna active transport na hatuna mechanism yote, maana yake ingekuwa 400, 400, 400, 400, 200, 200, 200, 200. Lakini kwa sababu tuna mechanism kama hii hapa, unaona, from proximal converter tube hapa inaingia. Countercurrent multiplier sasa imefanya kazi. Yani without countercurrent multiplier ingekuwa inaonekana hivi. 400. With countercurrent multiplier inaonekana 300, 600. Maana yake huku inaongezwa salt hapa. Ili salt hapa itakayoongezwa water itoke huku ijae huku. Water inapotoka huku concentration inafanyaje? Inaongezeka. So movement of ions and water from the loop of Henle into the medulla of the kidney. The situation that would develop if the fluid in the loop of Henle were stationary. A, pale kama fluid kwenye loop of Henle ingekuwa stationary. Hichi ndicho ambacho ingetokea if the fluid in the loop of Henle were stationary. But what happened is this one, because the fluid is moving. So that the little situation which is happening, the little situation of the countercurrent multiply. And here the diagram of what is happening. Nako tuna osmosis, water in a move by osmosis, and the passive movement of the sodium chloride into the descending limb. But this is in a very small amount. Here sodium and the chloride ions, they move out by diffusion, and here the sodium and the chloride ions, they move out by active transport. This is the thin ascending limb, this is the thick ascending limb. Here we have the descending limb of the loop of Henle. Here, as you can see, the active transport, the two arrows, the thick one representing the active transport of sodium chloride, while the thin one, the passive movement of water and the sodium chloride. Kwa kuna difference kati ya proximal na distal converter tube hizo. Tuna hata haja ya kuzidiscuss sana, utaziona tu kwenye notes. First party, second party hizo tuna haja nazo. Sisi hapa tudili na countercurrent multiplier mechanism. Tubular reabsorption na tubular secretion pia kuna difference zake. Lakini pia kuna diagram nyingine kama hizo ambazo zina represent the countercurrent multiplier system. Unaona inaingia hapa ikiwa kwenye 300, inaongezeka huku inafanya vile. Actually hii ni vasa recta, blood vessel, hii ni loop of Henle. Kwa kwenye loop of Henle inavyokuwa 300 na hapa itakuwa 300. Huku inavyokuwa 400 maana yake wote yanatoka huku inaenda huku, wote yanatoka huku inaenda huku, naona wote yanatoka huku inaenda huku. Kwa hiyo ni hivyo, maana yake hii vasa recta nayo wote yanatoka huku inaenda kudilute yule pale. Sasa tuone mfano wa maswali. Describe the countercurrent multiplier system in the loop of Henle. Ni swali la NECTA mwaka 2002, swali namba 5A. Namba 5 NECTA 2012, swali namba 5B. Describe the countercurrent multiplier system in the loop of Henle. NECTA 2002, swali namba 5A. gives a brief explanation of how the loop of Henle operates as countercurrent multiplier system. Kwa hiyo swali hili lina maelezo ya kuelezea na lina diagrams ambazo unatakiwa uchore, ambazo utachora step by step. Now most of teachers, they prefer you to draw diagrams step by step. So despite of writing the explanation, you must draw the diagram and explain what happens step by step. Sasa tukianza na maelezo, the solution, the solution. The loop of Henle is the part of the nephron function. It consists of two limbs, the ascending limb and descending limb. The ascending limb has two segments, which are thick and thin ascending segment. The descending limb has one thin segment. The descending limb is highly permeable to water and impermeable to solute, and the ascending limb is capable of actively absorption of sodium chloride and potassium ions, but is impermeable to water. The loop of Henle is supplied with blood by a vessel network known as a vasector. The osmolarity of fluid in the interstitium surrounding the loop of Henle, also known as medulla interstitium, is hyperosmotic compared to normal body fluid osmolarity. So osmolarity of the medulla interstitial fluid increases progressively from 300 milliosmoles per liter at the beginning of the loop of Henle to 1200 milliosmoles per liter at the tip of the medulla. Now, this is achieved by the fact that loop of Henle is able to act as the countercurrent multiplier system as in the following steps. Naona kwa haya ndo majibu pia yaliyoko kwenye review yako tu vizuri, as in the following steps. Kwa step ya kwanza, let us assume that the loop of Henle is filled with the fluid with a counter concentration of 300 osmotic units, the same as that leaving the proximal tube, and the same as the concentration of tissue fluid and blood. To assume a situation in which we are starting with ni 300 kote. In the second step, let's explain about the sodium pump. What does it do? By active transport in the thick ascending limb, sodium potassium pumps sodium, chlorine and potassium ions out of the cells of the limb into the medulla. This reduces the concentration of these ions inside the ascending tube and raising the concentration in the medulla interstitium. Since the wall of the ascending limb are impermeable to water, walls are impermeable to water, the result of this ionic movement is that the concentration of the fluid in the ascending limb decreases until a zero osmotic unit. So concentration gradient is established by the interstitial fluid and renal fluid. Kwa hiyo tunakuwa tunatoa sodium chloride ndani tunapeleka nje. This reduces the concentration of these ions inside the ascending limb and raising the concentration in the medulla interstitium, kwa sababu wall of the ascending limb are impermeable to water. So the result of this ionic movement is that the concentration of the fluid in the ascending limb decreases until a 200, actually it's not zero, ina decrease hadi 200 osmotic units. Kwa hiyo kuanzia hapa chini tunatoa iron mpaka inafika huku 200. Actually hapa sio lazima iwe 200, lakini inapungua mpaka inafika 200, active transport of sodium. Hasa tunavyotoa tunaongeza concentration ya sodium kwenye medulla hapa. Tukiongeza manake tunaongeza osmotic pressure ya kuvuta maji kutoka kwenye mguu huu as descending limb of the loop of Henle. So step 3 is nini? Osmosis. Step 3 ni osmosis. Tunasema since the descending loop of Henle is permeable to water, it is permeable to water, and its fluid has a higher osmolarity than interstitial fluid. Unaona? Water moves by osmosis from fluid in the descending limb to the interstitium. This creates an osmolarity of 400 osmotic units in the fluid in the descending limb. And this makes the fluid in the descending limb to progressively become more concentrated as it moves down the limb. Kwa unaona hapa inaanza 300, inakuja 400. But actually haishi tu 400, inaongezeka inavyozidi kumove kwenda chini. Unaona? Step 4 ni conservation of water. The vasector carries away the fluid of the medulla, which now has reabsorbed water, thereby maintaining the potential gradient in the medulla. necessary for osmosis to occur. Blood in the vasorector flow slowly to enable it to come into equilibrium with the medulla at all levels. Additional flow of fluid into the loop of Henle from the proximal converted tube causes the hyperosmotic fluid previously formed in the descending limb to flow into the ascending limb, where more ions are pumped out of the limb into the medulla interstitium, with the water remaining behind until 200 osmotic gradient. It established until 200 osmotic gradient is established with interstitial fluid osmolarity raising to 500 osmotic units. Kwa hiyo utakuja kuona katika stage inayofuata kwamba huyu huku anavyokuja kuwa 200, hii hapa 400, 200, 400, 200, huku haiwi tena 300. Kwa kadri interstitial inazidi kuongezeka na hao wanazidi kutoa water, unaona? Wanazidi kutoa water. So katika step 5 hiyo hapo, once again the fluid in the descending limb reaches equilibrium with the hypertonic medulla interstitial fluid, and the hypertonic osmotic tubular fluid from the descending limb flows into the ascending limb. Still more solute is continuously pumped out. Kwa hiyo diagram inakuwa inaonyesha kama hivi. Actually hizi concentration number zake tu ndo hawajaziweka accurate, lakini what happen ni kwamba hii concentration inazidi kushuka, inaongezeka, inapopanda inapungua. Unaona, the above steps are repeated over and over again with the net effect of adding more and more solid to the medulla. Yani kikubwa uelewe countercurrent multiplier inaongeza salt hapa, ikishaongeza salt hapa maji yanatoka huku yanakuja hapa. Ikishuka concentration inaongezeka hadi hapa, huku concentration inapungua. This process gradually traps solute in the medulla and multiplies the concentration established by the active pumping of ions out of the ascending loop of Henle, eventually raising the interstitial third osmolarity to 1200. Unaona, kwa sometimes hii inaweza kaongezeka osmolarity hadi ikawa 1200 au 1400, lakini kwa hapo tuko tunaonyesha tu ni 400. So this marks the end of our discussion regarding countercurrent multiplier. In the coming session, we'll be discussing about the hormonal control of osmoregulation when we are about to finish this topic. Thank you.